The rope burned against Nora Ellsworth's palms as she hauled herself over the fence rail, her borrowed shirt already soaked through with sweat, despite the cool Montana morning. She had bound her copper hair so tightly beneath her father's old hat that her scalp ached, and the strip of cloth wrapped around her chest made every breath a conscious effort. But none of that mattered now, because the foreman was walking toward her with a clipboard, and she needed this job more than she needed her next breath. "You there," the foreman called, squinting at her through the dust. "What did you say your name was?" "Noah," she said, deepening her voice to a rasp that sounded more like she had spent years smoking cigars than her actual 19 years suggested. "Noah Ellis." The foreman, a grizzled man with a scar running from his left eye to his jaw, looked her up and down with the same scrutiny he might give a horse he was considering purchasing. "You look awful young. You ever worked cattle before?" "Been working ranches since I could walk," Nora lied smoothly. In truth, she had grown up on a small farm in Kansas, but that farm was gone now, sold to pay her father's debts after he died last winter. Her mother had remarried within 3 months, and her new stepfather had made it clear that Nora's options were to marry his friend, a widower twice her age with 3 wild children, or find her own way. She had chosen the latter, riding west with nothing but the clothes on her back and her father's hat. The foreman grunted. "We'll see about that. Pay is $30 a month plus room and board. You sleep in the bunkhouse with the other hands and you pull your weight or you're out. We've got 3,000 head of cattle on this spread, and the boss expects every one of them accounted for. You understand?" "Yes, sir." "Work starts at dawn. You'll be riding fence line today with Tucker. That's him over there." The foreman jerked his thumb toward the corral where a tall man was saddling a buckskin mare. Even from a distance, Nora could see the confident way he moved, the easy grace of someone who had spent his entire life on horseback. "Tucker Steele is the best hand we've got. You watch what he does and maybe you'll learn something." Nora's heart hammered as she walked toward the corral. She had spent the last 2 weeks perfecting her disguise, practicing her walk and her voice in the privacy of the forest where she camped each night. She had studied the way men moved, the way they stood with their legs apart and their shoulders squared, the way they spat tobacco juice and scratched themselves without embarrassment. She had cut her hair short with her father's hunting knife, leaving just enough length to tuck under the hat. She had stolen the clothes from a washing line outside a boarding house, choosing the most worn and anonymous item she could find. But all of that preparation meant nothing if this Tucker Steele saw through her disguise in the first 5 minutes. He was even taller up close, well over 6 feet, with shoulders that strained against his faded blue shirt. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he was not smiling now. His eyes were a startling shade of green, like new grass after rain, and they fixed on her with an intensity that made her want to take a step backward. "You the new hand?" His voice was deep, with a slight drawl that marked him as someone from the South, maybe Texas or Arkansas. "Yes, sir." "Noah Ellis." He did not offer to shake hands, just continued cinching the saddle on his mare. "You know how to ride?" "Yes, sir." "You know how to rope?" "Yes, sir." "You know how to keep your mouth shut and your ears open?" Nora blinked. "Yes, sir." "Then stop calling me sir." "My name is Tucker. That bay over there is yours. Saddle up. We've got 10 miles of fence to check before noon." He swung up onto his mare with the fluid motion of someone who had done it 10,000 times before and waited, watching her. Nora walked to the bay, a sturdy gelding with a white blaze on his face, and reached for the saddle blanket. Her hands shook slightly as she settled it on the horse's back, but she forced them steady. She had learned to saddle her father's plow horse when she was 12, And though this Western saddle was different from what she was used to, the principle was the same. She worked quickly, aware of Tucker's eyes on her, checking the cinch twice before she climbed into the saddle. Tucker nodded once, as if she had passed some test, and turned his mare toward the open rangeland beyond the ranch buildings. Nora followed, her legs already protesting the unaccustomed strain of sitting astride instead of side saddle. The morning sun was climbing higher, burning off the mist that hung in the valleys, and the mountains rose purple and distant on the western horizon. This was Montana Territory in the year 1882, a land still raw and untamed despite the railroad that had come through 10 years before. Ranches like this one, the Broken Creek Ranch, sprawled across thousands of acres, and men could ride for days without seeing another human soul. They rode in silence for the first hour, following the fence line that marked the eastern boundary of the ranch. Tucker set a steady pace, not fast but relentless, and Nora found herself grateful for the years of farm work that had given her at least some endurance. Every so often he would stop to examine a section of fence, testing the tension of the wire or checking a post for rot. She watched everything he did, committing it to memory, knowing that any mistake could expose her. "You talk much?" Tucker asked suddenly, startling her out of her thoughts. "Not unless I have something worth saying." He glanced at her, and for a moment she thought she saw amusement flicker in those green eyes. Good policy. Most of the hands talk too much, spend all their energy flapping their jaws instead of doing their work. "How long have you worked here?" Nora asked, trying to keep her voice in that lower register. 5 years. Came up from Texas after the war." He must have meant the war between the states, though that had ended more than 15 years ago. He looked to be about 27 or 28, which would have made him just a boy during the conflict, but Nora did not question it. Everyone in the West had a past they did not talk about. "Why did you leave Texas?" Tucker was quiet for so long that Nora thought he was not going to answer. Then he said, "Drought killed all the cattle. My father lost everything. He took his own life rather than face bankruptcy, and my mother died of grief 6 months later. I had a younger sister, but she went to live with our aunt in St. Louis. I rode north looking for work and ended up here." "I am sorry," Nora said quietly, and she meant it. She understood loss. Tucker shrugged. "It was a long time ago. What about you?" "Where are you from?" "Kansas," Nora said, because it was easier to stick close to the truth. "My father died last winter. I needed work. No other family. No one I want to claim." Tucker nodded as if that made perfect sense. They rode on, and Nora felt some of the tension ease from her shoulders. Maybe this would work. Maybe she could actually pull this off. They found the first break in the fence around mid-morning, a section where the wire had snapped and curled back on itself. Tucker dismounted and pulled tools from his saddlebag, and Nora followed suit, watching as he measured out new wire and began splicing it to the broken ends. His hands were large and scarred, the hands of a man who worked with them every day, but they moved with surprising dexterity. "Hand me those pliers," he said, and Nora scrambled to comply. She held the wire steady while he twisted it into place, acutely aware of how close he was, close enough that she could smell the leather and tobacco and horse that clung to him. Close enough that if he looked at her, really looked at her, he might see past the dirt and the baggy clothes to what she was hiding. But he did not look at her. He finished the repair, tested it with his full weight, and nodded. "That will hold. Come on. We have got more ground to cover." By the time they returned to the ranch at dusk, Nora was so exhausted she could barely stay in the saddle. Every muscle in her body ached, and the binding around her chest had rubbed her skin raw in places. But she had made it through the first day, and Tucker had not questioned her once. The bunkhouse was a long, low building with a tin roof and narrow windows. Inside, a dozen bunks lined the walls, and a pot-bellied stove squatted in the center. The other ranch hands were already there, some cleaning tack, others playing cards. They looked up when Nora entered, their faces curious but not hostile. "New kid," one of them said, a stocky man with a beard like a bird's nest. "Where did Crawford find you?" "I found him," Nora said. "Needed work. Do not we all?" The man laughed and returned to his cards. "Name is Bill. That there is Henry, and that ugly bastard in the corner is Pete. Tucker you already know." Tucker had followed her into the bunkhouse and was stowing his gear in a trunk at the foot of his bunk. He glanced up at the mention of his name but said nothing. "There is a bunk in the back," Bill said. "It was Charlie's, but he lit out last week. Said he was going to try his luck in the goldfields. Idiot." Nora made her way to the indicated bunk and dropped her saddlebag onto the thin mattress. The bunk was against the back wall, which was both a blessing and a curse. It gave her some privacy, but it also meant she was cornered if anyone decided to investigate her too closely. "Supper is in an hour," Henry called. "Hope you like beans and salt pork, because that is what Cookie makes every damned night." Nora forced a laugh and busied herself arranging her few belongings. She had brought almost nothing with her, just a change of clothes, her father's watch, and a small Derringer pistol that she kept hidden in the bottom of her bag. She had never fired it, but the weight of it was reassuring. That night, she ate supper with the other hands in the cookhouse, a separate building that smelled of wood smoke and grease. The food was as basic as Henry had promised, but Nora was so hungry she would have eaten shoe leather. She kept her head down and her hat on, speaking only when spoken to, and tried not to notice the way Tucker watched her from across the table. After supper, most of the hands retired to the bunkhouse to play cards or clean their weapons. Nora pleaded exhaustion and climbed into her bunk, turning her face to the wall. She waited until she heard the steady breathing of sleep around her before she carefully loosened the binding around her chest, just enough to let herself breathe properly. The relief was so intense she almost groaned aloud. She lay awake for a long time, staring at the rough planks of the wall and wondering how long she could keep this up. A week, maybe 2 if she was lucky. But what happened after that? Where would she go? What would she do? She did not have any answers, so she closed her eyes and prayed for sleep. The next 5 days passed in a blur of hard work and constant vigilance. Nora rode fence lines, herded cattle, repaired broken equipment, and did everything the foreman asked without complaint. She learned to move like the other hands, to speak in the clipped, economical way they did, to laugh at their rough jokes even when she did not understand the punchline. She learned to chew tobacco, though it made her sick the first 3 times, and to spit with the same casual accuracy as the others. She learned to ignore the crude talk about women that filled the bunkhouse at night, biting her tongue until it bled to keep from defending herself. And through it all, Tucker watched her. He never said anything directly, never accused her or questioned her more than he questioned any of the other hands. But she felt his eyes on her constantly, measuring, assessing. He worked beside her most days, and she could not tell if it was because the foreman had assigned them together or because Tucker had requested it. Either way, it made her nervous. On the 3rd day, they were herding a group of steers back to the main pasture when one of the animals broke away and headed for a ravine. Without thinking, Nora spurred her horse after it, leaning low over the saddle as she uncoiled her rope. The steer was fast, but her horse was faster and she closed the distance in seconds. She swung the loop, feeling the satisfying weight of it as it left her hand, and watched it settle over the steer's horns. She pulled the horse up short, letting the rope go taut, and the steer jerked to a stop. When she looked up, Tucker was watching her with an expression she could not read. "Where did you learn to rope like that?" he asked when they had driven the steer back to the herd. Nora's mind raced. She had learned from her father, who had been a fair hand with a rope despite being a farmer, but she could not say that without inviting more questions. "Here and there," she said vaguely. "You pick things up." Tucker nodded slowly, but she could see he was not satisfied with the answer. On the 5th day, they were repairing a water trough when Nora slipped on the wet wood and fell, landing hard on her side. The breath left her lungs in a rush, and for a moment she could not move. Tucker was beside her in an instant, his hands on her shoulders. "You all right?" His voice was sharp with concern. "Fine," Nora gasped, trying to sit up. But Tucker's hand had brushed against her chest, against the binding, and she saw his eyes widen slightly. He let go of her as if she had burned him and stepped back. "You sure you are fine?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Yes." Nora got to her feet, brushing mud from her pants. Her heart was hammering so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Just got the wind knocked out of me." Tucker said nothing, just turned back to the trough and continued working, but Nora knew. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, in the way he would not meet her eyes. He had guessed. Or if he had not guessed outright, he suspected, and it was only a matter of time before he said something. That night, she lay in her bunk and considered running. She could take her horse and be gone before dawn, disappear into the mountains or head for one of the mining towns where nobody asked questions. But she had no money, nowhere to go, and winter was coming. If she left now, she would likely freeze to death before she found another job. On the 6th day, Tucker said nothing. He worked beside her as he had all week, his manner no different than it had been before. Nora began to hope that maybe she had imagined his reaction, that maybe he had not noticed anything after all. But on the 7th day, as they were riding back to the ranch in the late afternoon light, Tucker suddenly reined in his horse and turned to face her. "We need to talk," he said. Nora's stomach dropped. "About what?" "You know what." His green eyes were steady on hers. "I have known since the first day, but I figured it was not my business. But if I have figured it out, someone else will too, and when that happens, things could get ugly." Nora considered denying it, but she could see it would be pointless. Tucker was not a fool, and she was tired of pretending. "Are you going to tell the foreman?" "No." Tucker dismounted and tied his horse, then gestured for her to do the same. "But we need to figure out what to do about this, because you cannot keep working here like this. It is too dangerous." "Dangerous for who?" Nora demanded, her fear turning to anger. "I have been doing the work, have I not? I have pulled my weight." "That is not what I mean, and you know it." Tucker's voice was patient but firm. "What happens when one of the other hands figures it out? What happens when Crawford decides to check on why you never take your shirt off around the others? What happens when we are out on the trail for weeks at a time and you cannot hide anymore?" Nora looked away, blinking back tears of frustration. "I did not have a choice. I needed work, and no one will hire a woman for ranch work. This was the only way." "Why did you need work so badly that you would do this?" So she told him. About her father's death, about her mother's remarriage, about the widower her stepfather wanted her to marry. About riding west with nothing, sleeping in the forest, stealing clothes because she had no money to buy them. About being so desperate that she had cut her hair and wrapped her chest, and decided to become someone else, because it was the only way to survive. Tucker listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "What is your real name?" "Nora. Nora Ellsworth." "All right, Nora Ellsworth." He said her name carefully, as if testing it. "Here is what we are going to do. You are going to keep working here, but you are going to let me help you keep your secret. I will make sure you are paired with me as much as possible, and I will cover for you when you need privacy. In exchange, you are going to trust me. Can you do that?" Nora stared at him, searching his face for any sign of deception or ulterior motive. But all she saw was sincerity and something else she could not quite name. "Why would you help me?" Tucker shrugged. "Because I know what it is like to be desperate. Because you are a good worker and this ranch needs good workers, and because it is the right thing to do." He paused, then added, "Also, I had a younger sister, remember? She was about your age when I last saw her. If she ever needed help and someone could give it, I would hope they would." Nora felt the tears spill over then, hot trails down her dusty cheeks. She scrubbed them away with her sleeve, angry at herself for crying. "Thank you." "Do not thank me yet," Tucker said wryly. "This is going to get complicated." He was right about that. Over the next few weeks, Tucker became her constant shadow and protector. He made sure she was always paired with him on jobs that required overnight trips. He stood guard when she needed to wash or change clothes. He deflected questions from the other hands about why she was always so quiet, so private. He even taught her to bind her chest more comfortably so the constant pressure would not leave marks that someone might notice. And slowly, without either of them quite meaning for it to happen, they became friends. Nora learned that Tucker had a dry sense of humor that only emerged when they were alone. She learned that he could read and write, unusual for a ranch hand, and that he carried a battered copy of Shakespeare's sonnets in his saddlebag. She learned that he had nightmares sometimes, waking the whole bunkhouse with his shouting, and that he never talked about what he dreamed. She learned that he had scars on his back that looked like they came from a whip, though he never explained them. Tucker learned that Nora could sing, though she only did it when she thought no one was listening. He learned that she had a gift for gentling horses, that she could calm the most fractious animal with a few soft words and a steady hand. He learned that she was afraid of thunderstorms, a fear that dated back to the tornado that had destroyed a neighbor's farm when she was a child. He learned that she missed her father with an ache that had not diminished despite the months that had passed. They learned to work together with the kind of seamless coordination that usually took years to develop. Tucker could gesture to a straying cow, and Nora would know exactly what he wanted her to do. Nora could call out a warning, and Tucker would react without hesitation. The foreman noticed and started pairing them together more often, which was both a blessing and a complication. Because somewhere in those weeks, Nora realized she was falling in love. It crept up on her slowly, disguised as friendship and gratitude. She told herself it was natural to admire someone who had shown her such kindness. She told herself it meant nothing that her heart beat faster when Tucker smiled at her, or that she found excuses to ride closer to him than strictly necessary. She told herself that the warmth she felt when he looked at her was just appreciation, nothing more. But then came the day in late October when they were caught in an early snowstorm while checking on a herd in the high pasture. The storm came out of nowhere, as storms in the mountains often did. One moment the sky was clear, and the next it was dark with clouds that dumped snow in thick, heavy flakes. The temperature plummeted, and the wind rose to a howl that made conversation impossible. Tucker grabbed Nora's reins and led both horses toward a stand of pine trees he had spotted earlier. They dismounted in the relative shelter of the trees and huddled together, using their horses as windbreaks. The storm raged for hours. Nora lost feeling in her fingers and toes, and her teeth chattered so hard her jaw ached. Tucker pulled her against his chest, wrapping his coat around both of them, and she pressed as close to him as she could, seeking his warmth. She could feel his heart beating steady and strong beneath her cheek, could feel the rise and fall of his breathing. And she realized with a clarity that was almost painful that she wanted this. Not just the warmth, not just the safety. She wanted him. She wanted to be held by him, to wake up beside him, to spend her days working with him and her nights talking with him. She wanted all the things she had never let herself want before because she had been too busy surviving. The realization terrified her. When the storm finally blew itself out and they rode back to the ranch, both of them half frozen and exhausted, Nora could barely look at Tucker. She was afraid he would see everything written on her face, all the feelings she had no right to have. But if Tucker noticed anything different, he did not say so. He just helped her take care of the horses, made sure she got a cup of hot coffee from the cookhouse, and told her to get some rest. That night, lying in her bunk, Nora forced herself to face the truth. She was in love with Tucker Steele, and it was the most foolish thing she had ever done. Even if he returned her feelings, which she had no reason to believe he did, what kind of future could they have? She was living a lie, and lies always came out eventually. When they did, Tucker would be ruined right along with her for helping to hide her secret. The ranch would fire both of them, and Tucker's reputation would be destroyed. She could not do that to him, not after everything he had done for her. So she did the only thing she could do. She tried to put distance between them. She started volunteering for jobs that would keep her away from Tucker. She stopped lingering after supper to talk with him. She kept her responses short when he asked her questions. She could see the hurt and confusion in his eyes, but she forced herself to ignore it. It was better this way. Better to end this friendship now before it became something that could hurt them both. But Tucker was not willing to let her push him away so easily. 2 weeks after the snowstorm, he cornered her in the barn where she was cleaning tack. The other hands were all at supper and they were alone. Tucker closed the barn door behind him and leaned against it, his arms crossed. "All right," he said. "What is going on?" "I do not know what you mean." Nora kept her eyes on the bridle she was oiling. "You have been avoiding me for 2 weeks. Did I do something to offend you?" "No." "Then what is it?" Nora set down the bridle and faced him. "Nothing. I just think it would be better if we were not quite so friendly. People are starting to notice, and I do not want them asking questions." Tucker's eyes narrowed. "That is not true. Bill asked me yesterday why you seemed upset, and I did not have an answer for him. What is really going on, Nora?" The sound of her real name, spoken in his deep voice, nearly undid her. She looked away. "It does not matter. It matters to me." Tucker crossed the barn to stand in front of her, so close she had to tilt her head back to look at him. "Tell me what I did wrong so I can fix it." "You did not do anything wrong." Nora's voice was barely a whisper. "That is the problem." Tucker frowned. "I do not understand." And because she was tired of lying, tired of hiding, tired of pretending she felt nothing when she felt everything, Nora said, "I care about you, more than I should. More than is wise. And I cannot keep working with you every day, feeling the way I do, knowing that nothing can ever come of it." The silence that followed her confession was the longest of her life. Tucker stared at her, his expression unreadable, and Nora wanted to sink through the floor and disappear. Then Tucker said, very quietly, "Who says nothing can come of it?" Nora's breath caught. "What? You think I do not care about you?" Tucker's voice was rough with emotion. "You think I have not been going out of my mind these past 2 weeks, trying to figure out what I did to make you pull away from me? Nora, I have been in love with you since that day you roped that steer. Maybe before that. I just did not know how to tell you." "You cannot," Nora said desperately. "Tucker, I am living a lie. When people find out, and they will find out eventually, you will be ruined for helping me. You will lose your job, your reputation, everything. I cannot let that happen to you. That is my choice to make, not yours." Tucker reached out and took her hands in his. "And I choose you. Whatever comes, we will face it together. You do not understand what you are saying." "I understand perfectly." Tucker's grip on her hands tightened. I understand that you are the bravest person I have ever met. I understand that you make me laugh when I thought I had forgotten how. I understand that when I am with you, I feel like myself again, like the man I was before the war and the drought and everything that came after. And I understand that I do not want to spend another day pretending I do not love you. Tears were streaming down Nora's face again, but this time she did not bother to hide them. I love you too, but I am so afraid. I know. Tucker pulled her into his arms, and Nora buried her face in his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of him. But we will figure it out. I promise. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the dim barn while the wind whistled through the cracks in the walls. And for the first time since she had left Kansas, Nora let herself hope that maybe, just maybe, everything would work out. But hope was a fragile thing, and it shattered 3 days later when the foreman called Nora into his office. Crawford was sitting behind his desk, his scarred face grim. Standing beside him was a man Nora did not recognize, a portly gentleman in a city suit that looked absurdly out of place in the rough ranch office. Ellis, Crawford said, using the false name she had given him. Or should I say Miss Ellsworth? Nora's blood turned to ice. I do not know what you mean. Do not insult my intelligence. Crawford's voice was hard. This is Marshal Grant from Helena. He has been looking for a young woman who matches your description, a woman wanted for theft back in Kansas. Seems her stepfather filed charges after she ran off with some family jewelry. That is a lie, Nora said hotly. I did not take anything that did not belong to me. That is for the courts to decide, Marshal Grant said. His voice was oily and Nora disliked him instantly. You will need to come with me back to Kansas to face the charges. I am not going anywhere with you. You do not have a choice, Miss Ellsworth. I have a warrant for your arrest. Nora looked at Crawford, desperate. Please, I have been a good worker. You know I have. I have done everything you asked. Crawford's expression softened slightly. You have been a good worker, he admitted. But you lied to me. You lied about who you are, and you put this ranch at risk by being here. I cannot let that stand. What risk? Nora demanded. I have done nothing wrong except try to survive. You are a woman working as a ranch hand, Crawford said bluntly. If word gets out, every self-righteous prig in Montana will be calling for my head, saying I am running an immoral operation. I cannot afford that kind of attention. So you are just going to hand me over to him? Nora gestured at the marshal. Send me back to Kansas to face false charges. I am sorry, Crawford said, and he actually sounded like he meant it. But yes. The door to the office burst open and Tucker strode in, his face dark with anger. What the hell is going on here? This does not concern you, Steele, Crawford said sharply. Like hell it does not. Tucker moved to stand beside Nora. If you are arresting her, you are going to have to arrest me too. Do not be a fool, Crawford snapped. You had nothing to do with this. I knew who she was, Tucker said flatly. I have known for weeks. If you are punishing her for lying, then I am just as guilty. Crawford stared at him. You knew? Yes. And you did not think to tell me? No. Tucker's jaw was set. Because she is a good worker, like you said, and she deserves a chance. Touching, Marshal Grant said sarcastically, but it does not change anything. Miss Ellsworth is still coming with me. Over my dead body, Tucker said quietly. The marshal's hand moved toward the gun at his hip, and Nora grabbed Tucker's arm. Do not, please, it is not worth it. You are worth it, Tucker said fiercely. You are worth everything. Both of you calm down, Crawford ordered. He looked tired suddenly, older than his years. Grant, give us a moment. Wait outside. The marshal looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Crawford's expression made him nod and leave the office. When the door closed behind him, Crawford turned to Nora. Is what he said true? Crawford asked. Did your stepfather make up these charges? Yes, Nora said. My father left everything to me when he died. My stepfather wanted control of it, and when I would not cooperate, he tried to force me to marry his friend. I refused and left. There was no jewelry. He made that up to get me back. Crawford rubbed his face. Can you prove any of this? How? I have nothing. No money, no witnesses, no papers. It is just my word against his, and who is going to believe me? Crawford was silent for a long moment. Then he said, all right, here is what we are going to do. You two are leaving here tonight. I am going to tell Grant that you overpowered me and escaped. I will give you enough of a head start that he will not catch up before you get somewhere safe. Nora stared at him. Why would you do that? Because I do not like bullies, Crawford said simply. And because your stepfather sounds like a bully. Also, because Steele is the best hand I have got, and if he wants to throw his life away on you, that is his business. He pulled open a desk drawer and took out a small pouch. There is 3 months' pay for each of you in here. It is not much, but it should get you started somewhere. Tucker took the pouch, his expression stunned. Thank you. Do not thank me. Just get out of here before I change my mind. Crawford stood and held out his hand. Good luck to both of you. They shook hands, and then Tucker and Nora were running for the bunkhouse. Nora grabbed her saddlebag while Tucker collected his gear, and within 10 minutes they were mounted and riding hard for the mountains. Behind them, Nora heard shouting as Marshal Grant realized what had happened, but by then they were already disappearing into the darkness. They rode through the night, putting as much distance between themselves and the ranch as they could. By dawn, they were high in the mountains, following a narrow trail that wound between towering pines. When they finally stopped to rest the horses, Nora was shaking with exhaustion and reaction. Where are we going? She asked. West, Tucker said. There is a town called Black Hawk in Colorado, about a week's ride from here. It is a mining town, always growing, always changing. No one asks too many questions there. We can disappear, start over. Nora looked at him. Tucker, you do not have to do this. You do not have to throw away your life for me. I am not throwing anything away. Tucker dismounted and came to stand beside her horse. I am choosing you, Nora. I told you that. Did you think I did not mean it? I just do not want you to regret it. The only thing I would regret is letting you go. Tucker reached up and lifted her down from the saddle. His hands lingered on her waist, and Nora felt her breath catch. We are in this together now, for better or worse. I think you are supposed to save that line for a wedding, Nora said, trying to lighten the mood. Tucker's smile was slow and devastating. Is that a proposal, Miss Ellsworth? Nora felt her face heat. I did not mean it like that. Pity. Tucker's expression turned serious. Because I would marry you in a heartbeat if you would have me. Nora's heart felt like it was going to burst out of her chest. Are you serious? As serious as I have ever been about anything. Tucker cupped her face in his hands. I know this is fast, and I know we are running for our lives, and I know this is probably not how you imagined someone would propose to you. But I love you, Nora Ellsworth, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. So yes, I am serious. Nora kissed him. She did not plan it, did not think about it. She just rose up on her toes and pressed her lips to his, and Tucker made a surprised sound before he kissed her back. His arms came around her, pulling her close, and Nora felt like she was finally home. When they broke apart, both of them breathing hard, Tucker said, I am going to take that as a yes. Yes, Nora said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, I will marry you. They made camp there in the mountains and spent the rest of the day talking about their future. They would go to Black Hawk, Tucker said, and he would find work in the mines or as a ranch hand. Nora would not have to pretend to be a man anymore. She could be herself and they would build a life together. What if Marshal Grant finds us? Nora asked. He will not. Tucker said confidently. Colorado is a big territory, and Black Hawk is the kind of place where people go to disappear. As long as we are careful, we will be fine. They rode on the next day, following game trails and avoiding the main roads. Tucker proved to be an expert at traveling unseen, and Nora wondered again about his past, about the things he had done and seen that he never talked about. But she did not press him. Everyone had secrets, and she trusted that he would tell her in his own time. The journey to Colorado took 9 days instead of 7 because they had to detour around several towns where Marshal Grant might have sent word. But finally, on a cold November morning, they rode into Black Hawk. The town was everything Tucker had promised. It sprawled across a narrow valley, a chaotic collection of buildings that looked like they had been thrown up overnight. Mining operations dotted the surrounding hills, and the sound of stamping mills filled the air. The streets were crowded with miners, gamblers, merchants, and prostitutes, a rough and rowdy mix that reminded Nora of everything she had heard about the Wild West. They found a small church at the edge of town, a simple wooden structure with a cross on the roof. The minister was an elderly man with kind eyes, and he agreed to marry them without asking too many questions. Nora had no wedding dress, no flowers, no family to witness the ceremony. But when Tucker slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, a band he had bought from a merchant on the main street, she felt more joy than she had ever felt in her life. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the minister said. "You may kiss your bride." Tucker did, thoroughly, and Nora felt like she was floating. They rented a small cabin on the outskirts of town, a rough place with a single room and a wood stove, but to Nora it felt like a palace. Tucker found work as a guard at one of the mines, a job that paid well and did not require him to go underground. Nora took in sewing and laundry, grateful to be able to work as a woman again after months of pretending. Life in Black Hawk was hard, but it was good. They were together, and they were safe, and that was all that mattered. Winter came early and harsh that year. The snow piled up in drifts taller than a man, and the cold was so bitter that Nora sometimes thought she would never be warm again. But Tucker was there to hold her through the long nights, and that made everything bearable. They learned the rhythms of each other's lives. Tucker liked to wake before dawn and sit by the window with his coffee, watching the sun rise over the mountains. Nora liked to sing while she worked, soft melodies that reminded her of her father. Tucker had nightmares sometimes, and Nora learned to wake him gently, to hold him until the shaking stopped. Nora was afraid of the dark, a fear she had never admitted to anyone, and Tucker made sure to always leave a candle burning at night. They fought, too, the way all couples do. Tucker could be stubborn, refusing to admit when he was wrong even when it was obvious. Nora could be prickly, taking offense at things he did not mean. But they always made up before the sun set, remembering what they had been through to be together. As winter gave way to spring, Nora realized she was pregnant. She suspected it first when she woke one morning feeling sick, and then again when her courses did not come. But she did not say anything to Tucker until she was sure, not wanting to raise his hopes only to dash them. When she finally told him, on a warm April evening when the first wildflowers were blooming in the meadows, Tucker lifted her off her feet and spun her around, laughing like a boy. "We are going to have a baby," he said, his eyes shining. "Nora, we are going to have a baby." "I know." Nora was laughing too, caught up in his joy. "Are you happy?" "Happy. I am ecstatic. I am over the moon. I am the luckiest man alive." Tucker set her down gently, suddenly serious. "Are you happy?" "Yes," Nora said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. "I am so happy." The pregnancy was not easy. Nora was sick for the first 3 months, and she lost weight she could not afford to lose. But Tucker was endlessly patient, bringing her dry crackers and ginger tea, rubbing her feet when they swelled, reading to her from the newspaper when she was too tired to move. In July, Marshal Grant rode into Black Hawk. Nora saw him from the window of their cabin riding down the main street on a gray horse. Her blood turned to ice and she grabbed Tucker's arm. "He found us," she whispered. Tucker looked out the window, his expression grim. "Stay here. I will handle this." "No," Nora held on to him. "We are in this together, remember?" Tucker hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but stay behind me." They met the marshal on the street in front of their cabin. Grant dismounted slowly, his eyes moving from Tucker to Nora and back again. "So," he said, "here you are." "Here we are," Tucker agreed. His hand rested on the butt of his revolver, a casual gesture that fooled no one. "I have been looking for you for 8 months, Grant said. "Do you have any idea how much trouble you have caused me?" "Good," Nora said flatly. Grant's eyes narrowed. "You think this is funny, Miss Ellsworth? You are a fugitive from justice." "I am no such thing," Nora said. "Those charges are false and you know it. My stepfather made them up to get control of my inheritance. That is for the courts to decide." "Actually," said a new voice, "it is not." They all turned to see a woman walking toward them, a tall, elegant woman with silver hair and a black traveling suit. She was accompanied by a younger man in a lawyer's suit, and she carried herself with the kind of authority that made even Marshal Grant straighten. "And who are you?" Grant demanded. "My name is Harriet Caldwell," the woman said. "I am an attorney from Kansas City. This is my associate, Mr. Brennan. We have been looking for Miss Ellsworth for quite some time." Nora's heart sank. "I do not know you." "No, but I knew your father," Harriet said gently. "He was a client of mine many years ago. When I heard about his death and the charges that were filed against you, I did some investigating. It turns out your stepfather has been embezzling from your father's estate. The jewelry he claimed you stole, it never existed. I have affidavits from 3 different jewelers confirming that." Marshal Grant's face turned red. "That is impossible. I saw the warrant." "The warrant was obtained under false pretenses," Harriet said coolly. "I have already filed a motion to have it dismissed. In fact, I have papers here." She handed a document to the marshal. "That is a court order directing you to cease your pursuit of Miss Ellsworth immediately. If you fail to comply, you will be held in contempt." Grant stared at the paper, his jaw working. Then he looked at Nora. "You are a lucky woman, Miss Ellsworth." "I prefer Mrs. Steele now," Nora said quietly. And it was not luck, it was justice. Grant mounted his horse without another word and rode out of town. Nora watched him go, her knees suddenly weak. Tucker's arm came around her shoulders, steadying her. "Thank you," she said to Harriet. "I do not know how to repay you." "You do not need to repay me," Harriet said. "Your father was a good man and he would have wanted me to help you. Besides, I do not like seeing bullies win." She smiled. "There is more good news. Your stepfather has been arrested for embezzlement. The estate has been returned to your control, and I have taken the liberty of selling it for you. After my fees and the outstanding debts, there is still a considerable sum remaining, enough for you to buy a ranch of your own if you wanted." Nora felt tears prick her eyes. "I do not know what to say." "Say you will use it well," Harriet said. "Say you will build a good life with this man who clearly loves you. That will be thanks enough." After Harriet and her associate left, Nora and Tucker stood in the street for a long time, holding each other. They had been through so much, survived so much, and now, finally, they were free. "A ranch of our own," Tucker said wonderingly. "Can you imagine?" "Yes," Nora said. "I can." They bought land outside of Black Hawk, a beautiful spread with good water and plenty of grass. They built a house, A real house with multiple rooms and glass windows and a porch where they could sit and watch the sunset. They bought cattle and horses, and Tucker hired a few hands to help with the work. Nora planted a garden and learned to cook, though she was never very good at it, and Tucker did not seem to mind. Their daughter was born in late November, just as the first snow began to fall. She was tiny and perfect, with a shock of copper hair like her mother and green eyes like her father. They named her Rose after Tucker's mother, and Tucker cried when he held her for the first time. "She is beautiful," he whispered, "just like you." Nora thought her heart might explode with love. The years that followed were the happiest of Nora's life. She and Tucker worked side by side on the ranch, building it into one of the most successful operations in the territory. Rose grew from a baby into a bright, curious toddler, and then into a little girl who rode her pony fearlessly and helped her father mend fences. Nora sang to her daughter the same songs her own father had sung to her, and Tucker taught Rose to rope and read and never be afraid to speak her mind. When Rose was 3, Nora gave birth to twin boys. They named them Thomas, after Tucker's father, and James, after Nora's. The boys were loud and rambunctious, always getting into trouble, and Tucker loved them fiercely. Life on the ranch was not without its challenges. There were droughts and blizzards, cattle rustlers and disease, lean years when they barely made enough to pay the hands. But they faced everything together, and their love only grew stronger. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Tucker took Nora back to the mountains where they had camped on their flight from Montana. They left the children with the housekeeper and rode up into the high country, following the same trails they had taken all those years ago. "You remember this place?" Tucker asked as they dismounted in the meadow where he had proposed. "Of course," Nora said. "How could I forget?" Tucker pulled her into his arms. "I just wanted to remind you of where we started, and to tell you that I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Every hardship, every danger, every moment of uncertainty, because it brought me to you." Nora kissed him, pouring all her love into it. "I love you, Tucker Steele, more than I can ever put into words." "I love you too, Nora Steele. Always have, always will." They stood there in the mountain meadow, holding each other as the sun set over the peaks, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. And Nora thought about how far they had come, how much they had built together. She thought about the scared girl who had bound her hair and pretended to be someone she was not, and the cowboy who had seen through her disguise and loved her anyway. She thought about their children, growing strong and healthy on the ranch they had built with their own hands. She thought about the future stretching out before them, full of possibility and promise. And she knew, with a certainty that went bone deep, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The years continued to pass in a blur of seasons and milestones. Rose grew into a beautiful young woman with her mother's courage and her father's steady nature. She surprised everyone by announcing at 18 that she wanted to attend college in Denver, and Tucker and Nora supported her decision, proud of their daughter's ambition. The twins, Thomas and James, showed no interest in leaving the ranch. They were true cowboys, happiest in the saddle, and Tucker began training them to take over the operation when he was ready to retire. When Tucker turned 50, Nora threw a party for him at the ranch. All the neighboring ranchers came, along with the hands and their families, and the townspeople from Black Hawk who had become friends over the years. There was food and music and dancing, and Tucker pulled Nora into his arms and waltzed her around the barn floor while everyone clapped and cheered. "You are a terrible dancer," Nora teased him, "and you still cannot cook worth a damn," Tucker shot back. "I guess we are stuck with each other." "I guess we are." They held each other close, swaying to the music, and Nora marveled at how much she still loved this man. If anything, her feelings had only deepened with time, matured like good whiskey in an oak barrel. She knew every line on his face, every scar on his body, every story behind them. She knew his strengths and his weaknesses, his hopes and his fears, and he knew hers. That was what love was, she thought. Not the wild passion of their early days, though that had never quite faded, but this deep, abiding knowledge of each other. This certainty that no matter what happened, they would face it together. When Rose came home from college with a degree and a fiancé, a quiet geology professor named Daniel, Nora and Tucker welcomed him into the family with open arms. The wedding was held at the ranch in the spring, and Nora cried through the entire ceremony, remembering her own wedding day in that little church in Black Hawk. "Are you all right?" Tucker whispered, handing her his handkerchief. "I am perfect," Nora whispered back. "I am just so happy." The twins married within a year of each other, both of them choosing local girls who understood ranch life. Suddenly, the house that had seemed so large when they built, it was full of grandchildren, small voices and running feet and laughter that echoed off the walls. Tucker turned into the kind of grandfather who spoiled the children shamelessly, sneaking them candy and telling them wild stories about the old days. Nora scolded him for it, but secretly she loved seeing him with the grandchildren, seeing the joy they brought him. One afternoon when she was 58, Nora found Tucker sitting on the porch staring out at the mountains. There was something in his expression that made her heart clench, a sadness she rarely saw in him. "What is wrong?" she asked, sitting down beside him. "Nothing," Tucker said. Then, because he had never been able to lie to her, he added, "I was just thinking about time, how fast it goes, how little we have left." "We have plenty of time left," Nora said firmly. "We are not old yet." "I am 63, Nora, that is old." Tucker took her hand. "I just want to make sure you know how much you mean to me. How much this life we have built means to me. I never thought I would have this. After everything that happened in my youth, after I lost my family, I thought I was destined to be alone. And then you came into my life and everything changed." Nora felt tears prick her eyes. "You saved me," she said quietly. "When I was at my lowest, when I had nothing and nowhere to go, you saw me. You saw who I really was and you loved me anyway. That is a gift I can never repay." "You do not need to repay it," Tucker said. "Just promise me something, anything. When I am gone, I want you to keep living. Keep running the ranch, keep seeing the grandchildren. Do not let grief stop you from living." "Tucker, do not talk like that. I have to." Tucker's grip on her hand tightened. "I need to know you will be all right." "I will be all right," Nora said, even though the thought of losing him made her feel like she was drowning. "But you are not going anywhere for a long time yet. We have got years ahead of us." She was right. Tucker lived another 15 years, long enough to see all of his grandchildren grown and several great-grandchildren born. He remained active on the ranch until his last year, refusing to slow down despite Nora's worried protests. And when he finally died, peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, it was with Nora's hand in his. The funeral was huge, attended by hundreds of people whose lives Tucker had touched over the years. Rose gave the eulogy, her voice steady despite her tears, talking about her father's kindness and strength and unwavering love for his family. The twins served as pallbearers, along with their sons, and Nora stood by the graveside with dry eyes, too shocked by grief to cry. It was only later, after everyone had gone, and she was alone in the house that felt too big and too empty without Tucker in it, that Nora finally broke down. She curled up on their bed, clutching his pillow, and sobbed until she had no tears left. But she had made him a promise, and she intended to keep it. Nora threw herself into running the ranch, working alongside her sons and grandsons, determined to keep the legacy she and Tucker had built alive. She spent time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather, making sure they knew what kind of man he had been. She attended church every Sunday and sat in the same pew she and Tucker had sat in for 40 years, and she talked to him in her prayers, telling him about her day, about the family, about how much she missed him. The loneliness was crushing at times. She had not realized how much of her identity was tied up in being Tucker's wife, in being part of a pair. Now she was just Nora, and she had to figure out who that person was all over again. But slowly, she found her way. She discovered that she enjoyed painting, something she had never had time for when she was younger. She joined a quilting circle in town and made friends with the other widows, women who understood what it was like to lose the love of your life. She started writing down her memories, creating a record of her life with Tucker for her descendants. On the 5th anniversary of Tucker's death, Rose came to visit with a proposal. She wanted to turn the ranch into a foundation, a place where young women who were struggling could come and learn practical skills, the way her mother had all those years ago. It would be called the Tucker Steele Memorial Ranch, and it would help women who had nowhere else to go. Nora agreed immediately. It was exactly the kind of thing Tucker would have wanted, and it gave her a new sense of purpose. She spent the next few years helping Rose set up the foundation, interviewing young women, teaching them to ride and rope and run a ranch. She saw herself in so many of them, saw that same desperate determination to survive, and she did everything she could to help them succeed. When Nora was 87, she fell ill with pneumonia. The doctor warned her family that her age made recovery difficult, but Nora refused to give up. She fought the illness with the same stubborn determination that had carried her through life, and after 3 weeks, she began to recover. "You are too mean to die," Rose teased her when she was finally well enough to sit up in bed. "I learned from the best," Nora said, thinking of Tucker. But she knew her time was limited. She could feel her body slowing down, wearing out. She was not afraid of death, not really. She had lived a full life, had loved and been loved, had built something lasting, and she knew that Tucker was waiting for her, somewhere beyond the veil. On a warm September afternoon, when she was 91 years old, Nora asked her family to take her up to the mountain meadow where Tucker had proposed. They protested at first, worried about her health, but she insisted, and they finally agreed. They took her up in a wagon, making the journey slowly, and helped her to the spot where she and Tucker had stood all those years ago. The meadow was just as beautiful as she remembered, full of wildflowers and birdsong. Nora sat on a blanket her granddaughter spread for her and looked out at the mountains, remembering everything. Her flight from Kansas, her time as a ranch hand, the moment Tucker had guessed her secret. Their escape to Colorado, their wedding in the little church, the birth of their children. All the years of laughter and tears, of hard work and tender moments, of building a life together. "Thank you," she said softly, not sure if she was talking to Tucker or to God or to the universe itself. "Thank you for all of it." She closed her eyes, feeling the sun warm on her face, and she felt Tucker's presence all around her. She could almost feel his hand in hers, could almost hear his voice telling her he loved her. "I am coming," she whispered. "Wait for me." Nora Ellsworth Steele died peacefully that afternoon, surrounded by her family in the place where her greatest adventure had begun. She was buried beside Tucker on a hill overlooking the ranch, and her headstone reads simply, "Beloved wife, mother, grandmother, she lived fearlessly and loved deeply." Her story became legend in Black Hawk and the surrounding territory. People talked about the woman who had disguised herself as a ranch hand and the cowboy who had loved her anyway. They talked about the ranch she and Tucker had built, the foundation that still helped young women decades after her death. They talked about a love that had endured through hardship and danger and time itself. And on quiet nights when the wind blew down from the mountains, the ranch hands who worked the Steele ranch said they could sometimes see two figures on horseback, riding together across the high meadows, forever young, forever together, forever in love. The foundation that Rose had created in her father's name continued to thrive for generations, helping hundreds of young women find their feet and build new lives. Many of them went on to become ranchers themselves, carrying on the legacy that Nora and Tucker had started. The ranch remained in the Steele family, passed down from generation to generation, each one adding their own chapter to the story. Rose's daughter, who had been named Nora after her grandmother, grew up hearing stories about the original Nora and Tucker. She loved the tale of how her great-grandmother had bound her hair and worked as a ranch hand, how her great-grandfather had guessed the secret by week's end. When she was 18, she wrote a book about it, a romanticized version that became a bestseller in the early 20th century. The book brought renewed attention to the foundation, and donations poured in from all over the country. The Steele Ranch became a symbol of resilience and determination, proof that love could conquer even the hardest circumstances. Tour groups came to visit, to see where Nora and Tucker had lived and worked. The little cabin they had first rented in Black Hawk was preserved as a historical landmark. The church where they were married became a popular place for couples to exchange vows, wanting to capture some of the magic that had blessed the Steele's union. But more than the buildings or the land or even the foundation, what endured was the love story itself. In an age where divorce was becoming more common, where people married and remarried with casual ease, the story of Nora and Tucker stood as a reminder of what commitment really meant. They had faced poverty, persecution, danger, and loss, and their love had never wavered. They had built a life together out of nothing but determination and devotion, and that life had rippled outward, touching hundreds of lives across generations. Their great-great-grandchildren still told the story, gathering around the fireplace in the ranch house on winter nights, passing down the tale the way their ancestors had. The details changed slightly with each telling, embellished or simplified, but the core remained the same. A young woman desperate to survive, a cowboy who saw her for who she really was, and a love that defied all odds. The mountains where Nora and Tucker had first confessed their love to each other remained wild and beautiful, largely unchanged by the passage of time. The meadow where Tucker had proposed, where Nora had taken her last breath, was still full of wildflowers every spring. And if you went there on a clear day, stood very still and listened very carefully, you could almost hear the echo of their voices, the sound of their laughter carried on the wind. Because some loves are too powerful to be contained by a single lifetime. Some loves spill over into legend, into myth, into something eternal. And the love between Nora Ellsworth and Tucker Steele was one of those loves, a beacon that continued to shine long after they were gone, lighting the way for all who came after them, showing that with courage and faith and devotion, anything was possible.